Think Again TV is produced by Centre for Inquiry, Canada's premier venue for secular humanists, atheists, skeptics, and free thinkers.
In the summer of 2012, the Ontario Liberal government passed Bill 13, the Accepting Schools Act, which prohibits Catholic schools from denying to students their constitutional right to start gay-straight alliances, GSAs, or other sexual orientation-focused student societies. But a year and a half later, there are precisely 0 GSAs in Catholic schools, and some have long suspected Catholic boards of being up to something. Now I'm joined by Mississauga Catholic school student Christopher Karras here on Think Again TV with explosive allegations. In his recently launched human rights complaint, he documents a systematic effort directed at the highest levels to deny the legally enshrined rights of him and the students of Ontario. So, Christopher Karras, thanks so much for joining me here on Think Again Television.
Thank you.
Tell me a bit about your school.
I go to École Catholic Sainte-Famille in Mississauga.
Sounds like a French school.
Yes, it's a French Catholic school, and it's publicly funded.
Is it known for any particular educational focus?
It has a very strong sports program. I wish it had more artistics, but it's definitely a sports-focused school.
And more recently, I suppose it's become known as a school that is a challenging place to learn if you are a member of the LGBTQ community. Definitely. And you've reported that this school is actually a homophobic school.
Yes.
Can you clarify whether that's the appropriate way to describe it, and if so, why would you call it homophobic?
I think homophobia targets too much a specific person as being same-sex, but I really think that there's a lot of phobias or a lot of oppression towards the LGBTIQQ2SA community, and that there's a lot of pressures on me as a youth and on other students just for being who we are. I've had a teacher where he said to us that, and not just me, to other students, that queer and trans people should not have the right to adopt. I've had a psychology teacher that he didn't think that we should include same-sex couples in the family structures when he was teaching it to our class. I've put up posters that were very inclusive of my LGBT group, and yet they were taken down and were never taken into consideration.
We'll get to the posters because that's a recent flare-up, and I think that's something that's really put this school of yours under the crosshairs. Yeah. What else happened over the course of you're just finishing high school, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what has happened over the course of the 4 years that you went to this school? Are there other examples?
There's been instances where students have said in the hallways, that's so gay, but it's even come to the point where I've heard a student say, that's so homosexual.
Really?
Like, really?
So they know the appropriate language to use, but they're still making these comments.
It's disgusting, and I wish I could do more. I've taken the steps to take on a legal suit against my school and my school board.
Okay.
Since it took a year and 8 months to put my group into place, but then there was also several obstacles in the way of keeping my group running. And so now I'm just trying to do what's expected of a group that is accepting of everyone, right?
But these comments that you heard, and we'll get to the issue of the group in a moment, because I think that's kind of a separate matter. There, you're actually confronting a bias within the system that's prevented you from exercising a right that you have. But in terms of the atmosphere, the environment, that these comments that your teachers are saying has fostered. Can you comment on that? I mean, is it just these sporadic incidents, or is there almost a homophobic culture that permeates your school?
I would say that a lot of people would agree that what I've said and what has happened has been written and said in a narrative. It's as though one incident followed another, and a lot of them collide and kind of intersect as we go. It's really unfortunate that I've been targeted because of my sexuality, and I don't think that it's fair for any student to be targeted because of who they are.
There's another example that I read, maybe you can clarify this. It was about a book that you found to be highly offensive. Why did you find it to be offensive? What kind of action did you take as a result of that?
So the book is named Poison, and it's about alcoholism and how the father goes through a very violent alcoholic dilemma or incident. And one of the incidents that happened in the book is actually he's getting home and he opens up the door, and as he's coming in, he sees his son doing a sexual act with his partner, and as he sees what's going on, he says that it's unnatural, it makes him feel uncomfortable, he doesn't want
So this was the same-sex sexual act?
Yeah, and so he actually beats him with a baton, and it's very violent. And I don't think I've ever read anything so violent. And I don't think anything of that sort should be in our school. But also what was more shocking was that as the story read on, it was as though Patrick, the boy that I'm talking about, had the same-sex act, had gone through his life believing that the only way he could go on was by selling drugs or going to do criminal activity out in the street. Mm-hmm. He didn't see any other way out. Was
there any context or interpretation that was put on this by the teacher?
Was religious. It was...
they were interpreting this through a kind of a Catholic religious lens.
Definitely. Everything was seen as though... it was within Quebec, okay? So Quebec is a very religious Catholic community. And so when they were speaking in the throughout the book, they had used a lot of references to how the church had infiltrated different domains and different parts of everyday life.
Okay.
And there was even references to the bishops and to how they played a role. And so it was very evident that religion was playing a big role in oppressing Patrick throughout his life.
Now, what I'm curious is when you went to the teachers with, for example, complaints about the book or complaints about comments that other teachers had said, when you went to the administrators or the vice principal, what kind of a response did you get?
So when I spoke to the administration about the book, they said that they couldn't remove it because if they removed it, it would become censorship. And if they removed it, well, it would be like who is it that is actually censoring these books, right? And so I told them, well, if you don't want to censor the book, why don't you put other books out that are the opposite of Poison, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you're going to have a book about how money brings you to success, why not have a book that tells you how money doesn't bring you success, right? So I just felt...
So you were arguing for other perspectives on that particular issue?
Definitely.
And they weren't interested in that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, they didn't even think that it was a possibility of putting other books. And actually, in my new complaint, I asked to put in LGBT books so that there would be that possible literature for the students.
And the response to that, just for the record, was?
Well, there has been no response for the suit up to now, so it'll be interesting to see what they have to say.
Now, you have more recently been involved in attempts to start a positive support group for students, in particular with a focus on gay issues and sexual orientation. Was your interest in doing that as a result of this environment, this sort of what's been described as a homophobic environment in your school? Was it a response to that?
I really thought that it was important for me and for other students to have a place where we could feel safe and supported. Because it's really important that we could speak to other students about how we felt about certain things, but also have the possibility of speaking to other people that are going through the same thing.
Were you also empowered partly or motivated to do it at this time by the passing of Bill 13, this accepting school legislation, which prohibits administrators from blocking the creation of groups like the one you were interested in, even in Catholic schools? Was that part of the motivation?
For a long time, I had gone to different support groups here and there, and I had heard about Bill 13 way before it had been passed. And for a long time, I was thinking of possibly putting in a group, and I just didn't think that I would have the support until the bill passed, which is now known as the Accepting Schools Act. And so I waited, and as soon as it pretty much passed, soon after, I had pretty much made the decision that I was going to ask for a group, and that's when everything went downhill from there.
And we'll get to the downhill in a moment. Yeah. But I'm curious again about sort of your motives, and from what you're saying, it seems like it was in part Bill 13, it was in part the environment of the school that demanded this. What about you personally? You would come out as a gay youth when you were 15, I understand? Yes. And so that's not too long ago. No. Was it partly as a response to some things that happened in the school when you came out that you wanted to set up this support group for other students?
Yes, because there was a point where when I had come out, it had become very violent against me.
Really?
There was a lot of students that had used very harsh language about how they didn't want to support me and how I was disgusting, or that I wasn't an individual that they should be supporting.
These were students, colleagues of yours?
Yes, unfortunately. And it also came to a point where I had really wanted to leave. I didn't want to be at my school any longer. And I stayed because it had been such a long period of time that I had been fighting these obstacles, that I thought that it was important that I stick through it, and that I make change where I can make it before just leaving and giving up on it, right?
How long did that period last when you first came out and faced that not so supportive response? Did that happen quickly, or did that linger?
The violence was pretty quick. I think it happened within 2 to 3 days of me coming out.
Sort of violent threats. You don't mean actual violent attacks?
No, but the language was definitely violent. And after those incidents had happened, I had some students and friends that started supporting me strongly. And so ever since, I've created strong structures to keep me safe, but also feel supported, and that is what I want to give to other students.
So you have all these different sort of strands that come together in your mind, and you want to start a group. Tell me a bit about what you did at that point to get the group off the ground.
So when I wanted my group, I was at school a little later than usual, and I had seen my vice principal in her office, and I went over to her and I spoke to her. I said, I really want to put in a group under the Accepting Schools Act. And she said, that sounds like a great idea. I want to
This is Bill 13.
Yeah, I want to send off an email to the school board. So she sent off an email, and of course that was the first and foremost obstacle that had been made. She sent off an email to the school board, and the school board got back to her and said, we want to send off a representative to speak to you an hour after school hours. And so she wasn't getting paid, but they wanted to talk to her about how they weren't comfortable with the Accepting Schools Act and how they had been previously lobbied against it. by the bishops, and so they really wanted to take this whole group out of account. Or if they were to support it, they weren't going to fully support my group.
Just so we're clear, this was after the passage of this bill. This is now
Yes.
law.
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, there was actually one point where I told my vice principal, when someone does a crime, what happens to that person? Do they go to prison? Do they have to pay bail or something? And she goes, "You have a good point." And she called up the school board and told them, he's serious about this law. We need to take him more seriously. And that's when they started talking and trying to get my group up and running.
Can you go into more details, if you're privy to it, about what kind of ways or mechanisms the school board had thought through in terms of making it difficult to actually start a GSA or a sexual orientation focused group?
So the biggest problem I got was when I wanted to put in my group, she made it very clear to me that I needed to have other founders to the group. And when I had put in the other founders, it wasn't clear to me that they were going to be another level of bureaucracy, but it pretty much had become that because everything had to get approved by them, but also had to get approved by the board. And so there was a lot of levels of bureaucracy leading up to a decision.
What other steps were taken once the group was founded? You've mentioned, for example, the name of the club, and let's actually stop there for a second, because you didn't want to necessarily call it a Gay Straight Alliance. You had your reasons for thinking that name might be, I guess, too limiting, was it?
I think that if you were to, I really strongly support any group that wants to call themselves a GSA, Gay Straight Alliance.
Yep.
But I think that it comes to a point where the students that go to the group feel that they're being identified. And I want to make sure that this group is inclusive to everyone and that they can come to my group without, and actually this is really their group, right? I just want them to feel like they can go to the group and be themselves without being identified by anyone,
right? If
they're an ally or if they are LGBT themselves, right?
Then it should be up to the students to decide what to call their group. Now, the Bill 13, is, as you know, has a special provision, a special clause in there that if students voluntarily want to call their group a Gay Straight Alliance, they have the right to do that. And I'm curious if, though you were not interested in calling it a GSA, did you get a feeling from the administration or from the school board that the GSA was a non-starter, the use of that particular name?
Definitely. I think that if I had wanted to put a name as a Gay Straight Alliance, I think they would have taken all the steps to have stopped my group from being named that or anything of that nature. If I wanted to call it unicorns or something, I think they would have been very against it.
If you had a rainbow in there in any way.
Yeah.
You've said, for example, that one thing that was where you also were stonewalled was in setting up the discussion topics.
Yeah.
So again, it was that if you had anything that was remotely related to sexual orientation or gay and lesbian issues, that it would be difficult to set up a meeting to discuss it. How did they limit your choices of discussion topics?
Well, first, we have my vice principal sitting in on our conversations. So the students feel that they're limited because she has put some of my friends in actual detentions or has taken them out for suspensions. And then she's sitting in on a conversation that could put them in a very uneasy place, right? So it's very uncomfortable to have her there, but just recently we've also had the principal get involved with the founders meetings. So if he gets involved with the members meetings, it's just going to escalate even more.
Is it typical to have a vice principal or even a principal sitting in the meetings of student groups at your school?
It definitely isn't. And actually, we've had a student that has spoken out to the media to tell them that that's in fact the truth, that we don't have vice principals or principals involved in the other groups at our school.
And why do you feel it's so problematic to have a senior administrator sitting in on these meetings?
Well, like I said, if there is any situation where a student may feel uneasy because they may have taken a detention or a suspension because of these individuals, it makes the conversation really hard to have with other students, right?
Do you sense that sometimes your fellow members of the group are self-censoring themselves, especially on, say, sexual orientation issues because of who's sitting in on these meetings?
Yes. There's actually been a moment where we did an icebreaker. And when we had done the icebreaker, I had asked, is there anything that you wanted to say today that you didn't have a chance to say because you didn't feel comfortable or because it's the first meeting or whatever it may be? And the majority of the students had wanted to say something that day and didn't say it because they felt uncomfortable.
So I guess to cut to the chase, do you think that given the environment in which you're having to run your student group, do you think that students at your school could actually run a fully functioning support group for students with that want to discuss sexual orientation?
At this point, I think that a lot of it has been me fighting for the right to have this group, and I don't think that the students have taken the steps they need to take to have this group running every year. And I'm worried because we didn't have the elections that I wanted to have, that the students haven't had the opportunity to build positions of power that would have allowed them to organize and to have a group for themselves.
From what you're seeing, would you characterize the actions taken by the administration and the board as violating Bill 13?
Yes. And I think my lawyer would say the same. He thinks I have a strong case, and I'm going to keep fighting until this comes to an end.
Let's talk about the posters, because I think the posters are at least one of the components in your challenge, in your complaint. Tell me what you were trying to accomplish with these posters.
So the posters were supposed to be promotional for the group themselves, and they had Harvey Milk on them, which is iconic in its own self. But there was a quote from Harvey Milk that said that he wanted to, he thought that everyone that had, not depending on your sexual orientation or your identity, you had the right to a safe group, a supported group. And my vice principal had thought that this quote was too focused on the LGBT community, but everyone has a sexual orientation and everyone has an identity. So I don't really understand what point she was trying to make.
And she described the quote as tendentious to to what she thinks the focus of a support group should be. And just so we're aware of what quote she's describing as tendentious, the quote is, all young people, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, deserve a safe and supportive environment in which to achieve their full potential. Can you comment or can you react to her characterizing a poster with that quote for your support group as tendentious?
So I looked up the word because I didn't know what it meant. And when I looked it up, it had said that it was a word that was most likely used for something that was controversial and was targeting something controversial. And I don't really understand what was controversial about my poster. Harvey Milk is iconic for fighting for LGBT rights. The quote itself was very inclusive. And like I don't know. There's no reason that this poster could have been oppressing any groups or saying anything that would have been deemed as controversial.
What was the reaction that you've been getting from your fellow students to the poster controversy and more generally to what you're trying to do at your school?
I've gotten support from the students. I've actually gotten a letter of support signed by the students, founders of the group. And I've created support systems at the school. But of course, there is students that have a strong religious belief, as well as staff and teachers. And I think that's also due to a lack of training, but they don't seem to understand, or they're too ignorant to understand that we are people and that we should be treated as such. But they think that because we're gay or that we're LGBT, queer and trans, that we're disgusting, or that we shouldn't have a right in a Catholic school. Just recently, someone tweeted at me telling me that I shouldn't be going to this school and that I should probably go to a public school. I don't understand that. I'm a Catholic and I'm gay. I have a right to be in this school just as any other student
Especially since you are going to a public school, a publicly funded school.
Definitely.
It should be open to everybody, including gay people, right?
So it's come to a point where I think that there's more work to be done.
In terms of the support or the response you've been getting from, let's say, teachers, right? Because a lot of your trouble, it sounds like, has been from the administration and even higher, from superintendents, from school board officials, trustees. But what about your average teacher? How do they see what you're going through?
So that's actually quite interesting. There was, when the article in the Toronto Star had come out, a lot of the teachers felt uncomfortable to come up to me, but it was evident that they were supporting me. And actually at one point I was in the library and a teacher walked up behind me and patted me on the back. And I was like, this is interesting. He couldn't say anything because he was worried he was going to get some sort of repercussion for it, but he was definitely supporting me just as any other teacher at the school. And so it's interesting that they know that there's this environment at the school and yet nothing's being done about it. Yeah,
I'm wondering if you can comment, sort of looking at all of the experiences you've had and that you've seen other people have, the conflict that teachers are in, because there have been some indications from the Catholic Teachers Association that it's not so much the teachers that really have a problem with, say, gay-straight alliances or groups like yours. Teachers are working directly with students. They see what they're going through. It really is the folks who are more distant, the trustees, the administrators. Do you almost feel some sympathy for these teachers who are in these conflicting situations?
I think anyone would have some sympathy for them, but I think that I've put a lot on the line to fight something that I believe in, and I think that all these teachers, staff, trustees, anyone that has a reason to fight, and I think everyone does, they should, and I think that we all have a responsibility. I don't think that we should be putting any slack on the issue, right? There's some of our board members of the CSDCS that are in same-sex couples. It doesn't make sense to me how they're sitting on a board that is oppressing the LGBT community and yet they don't support us. It doesn't make sense.
Since you've sort of come out as a champion for student groups focused on sexual orientation, have you been contacted by students at other schools in Ontario who are going through similar situations to you?
I've been contacted by students, by parents, by different teachers. I've been strongly supported, but also I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, well, this is the issue I'm having. What should I be doing? And I've said, you need to go fight it. If you believe in it, you should fight it. And some of them have. Some of them have put out petitions. Some of them have put up their own gay-straight alliances. And currently, what I'm doing actually is in May, I'm putting in place a gay-straight alliance forum to teach students how to put in place these groups. And what the law entails and how it supports them. And it's going to actually have 100 students come in. And we're going to go to Glendon College. Okay. It's going to be over 5 days. The forum is going to cost $35,000, and up to now we've raised $10,355.
So you're well on your way?
Yes.
You've got some time?
It's quite exciting.
Are these 100 students, how many different schools would that represent?
So we're trying to have at least 2 students of every school board that is in the Toronto GTA area.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're on your way to getting that representation.
Yeah, it's quite exciting.
How have you found those students? Have they come to you largely?
Actually, the way we've done it is I've been working with Jer's Vision. I'm good friends with Jeremy Diaz.
I'm going to take a moment to tell our viewers who this fellow is.
So Jeremy Diaz has actually fought his school board in the past, and he won a settlement of $5,000, which he put towards his own nonprofit.
What was his fight all about?
So he had been bullied on several occasions about his sexual orientation. And so he took it upon himself to put in a nonprofit that fights biphobia, transphobia, and homophobia. And so he's now strongly supporting me, and we are now putting in place this forum. And so Jer's Vision, what they have done to get the students into our forum is actually contacted the different school boards and asked, who are the best students? Who are the candidates?
You went through the Catholic school boards to get to the students.
Yes.
And you were supported by the boards in that?
I haven't heard anything yet. It should be interesting.
We'll have to have you back on Think Again TV to report on the outcome of that effort. Yeah.
There's also been an application form set up on the website.
Okay.
So anyone can go and apply, and hopefully they'll come to our forum.
But back to the present. How many students would you say are currently in Ontario in Catholic schools trying to start a GSA or something like what you're succeeding in doing, I should say, at your school?
Unfortunately, I don't know what those numbers would be, but I think a great majority of students that feel that they're being oppressed as a sexual orientation minority or a gender minority would wish to put these groups into place. So a large majority of students would be trying to put these groups into place.
So it's not just you, there is a critical mass out there.
Yeah, and there's been previous stories to my own fighting for these groups and have been successful in their own right, but also have had a lot of obstacles just as mine.
Let's talk about the government.
Sure.
The Ministry of Education. Any support directly from the ministry or the Minister of Education?
So I spoke to the Ministry of Education. When I spoke to them, I had told them what my story was, and it didn't take very long, but once I had said what the story was, they pretty much went silent on the phone. I didn't really think that they could help me in any way. And so I kind of felt hopeless at that point. And so that's when I started speaking to Andrea Houston, who started writing on my story, and ever since...
The reporter from the Extra.
Yeah, ever since it's caught a lot of news.
What actions are you taking now? What legal actions in particular?
Well, right now I've taken up a suit against the school and the school board under the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario.
Okay.
And so I signed with a lawyer, and we just filed it. So we should be hearing a response within the next 30 days.
And your suit is specific to the difficulties you've had with your group, or is it all the other sort of the homophobic environment that we touched on at the beginning of our conversation? Is it all of those things?
It's pretty much all of those things.
Okay.
If there's any incident where I felt that I was being oppressed, or there was any reason to believe that there was homophobia or any oppression, we put it in the case. So we strongly believe that the school and the school board have strongly oppressed me and other students.
Now, when you talk about oppression, you're going the route of the Human Rights Tribunal. But do you feel like your Bill 13 rights, or even your constitutional rights have actually been violated? Can you comment on how serious of a legal violation you feel you're going through?
I think that they've strongly gone against the law, and actually it's come to a point where I at one point wanted to know what was the repercussions for going against such a law. And unfortunately, most of our laws are written with no true penalty at the end of it. And so there has been no accountability for the actions my teachers, staff, or administration and school board have taken. They're not going to prison. They're going back to home with their children. They're going back to their supported religious communities, and there is no accountability for their actions. I wish there was more accountability. Maybe they don't have to go to prison, but it would be interesting to see if they had to pay a fine, if they had to do some sensitivity training, anything just to hold them accountable for their actions.
And beyond the human rights case, however that turns out, are there other legal steps, other legal options available to you?
So from my understanding, there hasn't been a lot of legal possibilities that I could have taken. But if I wish, there is definitely other actions I could take legally. And I'm looking into the possibility. Right now, I'm not going to comment on it, but up to now, I have filed a human rights application.
Gotcha. I wanted to just read to you a quote, and this comes from, I believe, a member of, I'm not sure if it's your school board or another school board trustee, who's commenting on, I suppose it's the slippery slope that the Catholic educational establishment finds itself in, having gone along with Bill 13. And it says, now we've seen the result of appeasing a belligerent anti-Catholic liberal government, a human rights complaint, and a student intent on publicly undermining Catholic sexual teaching. It's not too late for Ontario's bishops or Catholic school trustees to invoke Section 93. They should do it quickly. Section 93 is what provides the Catholic community with their denominational privilege to have publicly funded Catholic schools. Do you see this possibly leading to a landmark court case on Section 93 and its applicability to, for example, impeding, I would say, constitutional rights to gay students to form GSAs? Could it go that far?
I haven't seen Section 93, and I don't know what Section 93 would entail, but if it would be revisited, I think that there, not only myself, but there's a lot of individuals that would take actions to take the religion out of the state, right? There's no reason to have religion within state, and our government has made it very clear that everyone has a right on every front. But if they think that they have more rights because of who they are than myself because of my sexual orientation, I think that's getting into some very heavy ground.
I do want to ask you to comment on one last sort of legal case that's still sort of being discussed, and this is Riva Landau, who filed a notice of application against I guess it was against the government, basically, but it was to roll back the public funding and other kind of support the government gives to the Catholic boards. And her argument was that the Compromise of 1867 in the British North America Act only provided for a certain minimal level of public funding via property taxes to support Catholic schools, and now more than 90% of the funds that support Catholic schools come from general revenue rather than property taxes, so we should roll it back. Now, she was found to be notwithstanding because she wasn't closely enough associated with the Catholic school system.
Yeah.
You are closely associated with the Catholic system. You're a student whose rights you allege were violated by that system.
Yeah.
Have you given any consideration to sort of taking up the mantle from Riva and pursuing this particular challenge?
I can't really comment on that, but
You can comment on whether you've thought about doing it. You're aware of her case.
but it's definitely been a thought
Okay.
on my mind. It's definitely been something that could be a possibility in the future.
Gotcha. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything you wanted to sort of get off your chest about the whole situation that you've been in all these few years?
I think that it would be great to see the religious community become more accepting of people that identify as queer and or trans. And I really think that it's come to a point in time where we need to support one another, and it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter who you love, it doesn't matter what you do as a job, it doesn't matter what you go back home to. But I mean, everyone should support one another, and we don't have a right to oppress one another, we don't have a right to hate one another, and that we should love one another for who we are.
Christopher Karras, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Think Again TV and sharing the story. It's been a pleasure.